All right, one of the other things we told you to look for heading into week 2 on Straight Facts Home is the fact that the Lions don't lose back-to-back games. Going into this game, they lost week 1 at Lambeau Field. They were taking on the Bears. The last 10 times the Lions had played after a loss, they'd been 10-0. And they made it 11-0 in convincing fashion by absolutely thrashing the Bears today, 52-21. It wasn't just that the Lions rolled the Bears. It's that they continued this streak. In the previous 10 wins after a loss, they had averaged over 30 points and given up less than 15 points. So they basically averaged a win by 2 touchdowns. And they said, that's not good enough today. They absolutely took it to the Chicago Bears, 52-21. Jared Goff threw for 334 yards, had a career high 5 touchdown passes, including 3 to Amon-Ra St. Brown, as the Detroit Lions bounced back over the Bears, 52-21. So again, the things that we told you to look for heading into this game came into fruition. It wasn't surprising that this game went the way it did. The more surprising thing for me was just how easily they were able to do it. They did whatever they wanted offensively. They wanted to run the ball, no problem. They wanted to throw it with Jared Goff, no problem. But I also think that the Lions wanted to send a message, and a very convincing message, to Ben Johnson, the new head coach of the Chicago Bears, who was with them a year ago. There have been a lot of wild proclamations of what Ben's going to be able to do with Caleb Williams. We'll get to that in a minute. But after the loss, and the way they handled themselves, the Lions did in the fourth quarter, it was pretty clear that they wanted to send a very convincing message to the Chicago Bears. You're still the baby brother in this league and in this division. We still run this division. Now, obviously, the way Green Bay has come out is going to be a big challenge for Detroit, and I think that's something that they're going to have to deal with all season long. But it's clear that the Bears are not ready. And what told you that Dan Campbell wanted to send that message? In a game where they were absolutely steamrolling them in the fourth quarter, Dan Campbell decided to go for it anyway on 4th down. That's not, look, Dan does that anyway, right? We all understand that. Dan does that. He goes for it more than anybody else, almost anybody else in the NFL. That felt a little personal. And not that Ben Johnson did anything wrong or upset Dan Campbell in any way, shape, or form, but Dan is a guy who believes in intimidation. There's this great story when he was a backup tight end for the Cowboys, and the Cowboys were getting ready to play the Giants a few years ago under Bill Parcells. And Bill Parcells didn't like the way the team was practicing, and he called Dan Campbell aside and said, hey, get in there and start a fight. Get in there and start a fight in practice. And Dan went out there, started a fight, and that got the Cowboys fired up, and they went on the road that year to take down the New York Giants. And that's the mentality that Dan Campbell takes as a head coach. He played under Bill Parcells. Bill Parcells knew how to punch his buttons to get him to punch the buttons for the team, to make them feel good about themselves and be ready to roll. So it is not surprising in a game where they were absolutely hammering the Chicago Bears that Dan Campbell just decided to send a little extra message that, hey, a lot of people thought you were the reason for our success. You look at Jared Goff's numbers with Ben Johnson and without Ben Johnson, not very good. Dan Campbell said, I wanted to stuff it, basically. He sent a personal message to the Chicago Bears that he wanted them to know that all the things that he's read and all the things that he's heard about how Ben Johnson was really the secret sauce to this Lions offense, not today, not on my watch. And that's exactly what Dan Campbell did. You go look at the numbers. It was just absolutely incredible. The Lions were 3 points from matching a franchise record for points in a game. The Bears were 3 points from tying the most they'd allowed. It was just absolutely crazy. The Lions took advantage of a break late in the first half when 6 seconds was put back on the clock. Right before the half, it looked like they were going to have to kick a field goal. But because the spot official on the sidelines made an incorrect ruling, instead of put time left on the clock, they had time for another play. They went into the end zone and scored. And that was really it. Once they scored right before the end of the half, you could see that the Bears looked defeated. You could see that the Bears felt like, we don't have the horses to run with these guys. Not on their turf, not on their watch, not today. And it certainly turned out to be that way. So the Lions keep that streak going, as we told you was going to happen. 11 straight times they bounced back with a win after a loss. They have not lost back-to-back games since 2022. That's how long this streak has been. So it was a very positive afternoon for the Chicago Bears. For the Lions. It was an exact opposite experience for the Chicago Bears. And it's time to start questioning whether or not Caleb Williams is going to get it. It's not time to give up on him. It's only game 2 of his second year. But all the excuses you had last year with all the different offensive coordinators and Matt Eberflus as the head coach and the game mismanagement, especially in that Thanksgiving Day game against the Lions a year ago when they had no clue as to how to close out a game or run situational football, all those things are still in play because of what we saw Sunday in Detroit. You take a look at the numbers, and they're pretty mediocre for Caleb. Caleb was 19 of 30, 207 yards. Yes, he had 2 touchdowns to Rome Odunze. Thank you, Rome, on my fantasy team. But when the other team is lighting you up for 324 yards and 5 touchdowns, you got to find a way to match that energy. You got to find a way to match them strike for strike. And the Bears just didn't have it. They simply didn't have it. Caleb was 19 of 30, 207 yards, again, 2 touchdowns and an interception. And remember the stated goal? The stated goal that Ben Johnson said for Caleb this season was he wanted Caleb to complete 70% of his passes. Well, he's not close to that. He's not even close to that. He's completing just over 63%. That's a huge difference. Now, I didn't think he was ever going to get to 70, but that was the goal. That's what Ben Johnson wanted from his quarterback. In fact, you take away the first drive of the season last week in the Monday night game against the Vikings, where things look crisp, things look sharp, things look like they had fallen into place. The game had slowed down for Caleb Williams. Ever since that drive, to start the game a week ago against the Vikings, it hasn't looked that way at all. It has not looked that way at all. And you start to wonder, okay, what's it going to take? And again, the league is filled with quarterbacks that have gone different places and found a way to get it right. Look what Baker Mayfield has done in Tampa on his 4th team. His 4th team. Okay, remember, he started out in Cleveland, then went to Carolina, then went to the Rams for a brief stint. He has found a home in Tampa Bay. Look at what has happened to Sam Darnold when he's been on his journeys with the Jets. Wasn't great. Then he went to Carolina. He was there with Carolina at the same time Baker Mayfield was. That's how far both of their careers had fallen. Baker was the number 1 overall pick, and Sam, I think, was 3rd or 4th that year, the Jets, in 2018. And then a few years ago, they're both on the same team, the Carolina Panthers. And then Sam went to Minnesota last year and absolutely lit it up, revitalized his career, came through now in Seattle. They got their first win of the season. Huge road win, by the way, going to Pittsburgh and stomping Pittsburgh in Pittsburgh. Don't think a lot of people saw that coming. So it's not time to punt on Caleb Williams. It is time to question what's it going to take for him to get it right. What's it going to take? Because he has a ton of weapons right now. He has a bunch of things at his disposal that he can throw to, and he has supposedly an offensive guru in Ben Johnson as his head coach. But see, this points out another problem in the NFL. We tend to promote these assistants far too early, way too early before they're ready. Dave Canales, who was a hotshot offensive coordinator for the Bucs for just a couple of years, is now in year 2 as the head coach of the Carolina Panthers, and it has been a struggle. You look at so many other guys that have gotten opportunities early on, perhaps before they were ready. And look how long Aaron Glenn had to wait to become a head coach in the NFL, and his Jets are not up to a great start, but it took a while. Bill Belichick was in the league over a dozen years as an assistant before he finally got a head coaching job in the NFL. We hear so many people talk about we don't develop quarterbacks in the NFL, and that's true. We also don't develop coaching. We don't develop coaches in the NFL because turnover is so fast in the NFL, because we see year to year guys that weren't in the playoffs or teams that weren't in the playoffs the year before somehow find a way to make it into the playoffs the very next year. Suddenly we anoint these guys. We anoint them. Though they're ready. They're going to be the next big thing. And then they get their opportunity and it doesn't really work out. And I think what we saw in the game between the Lions and the Bears magnifies that point. Dan Campbell was an interim coach for a time in Miami when they went through a firing. He learned from that. He really studied and looked and embraced this opportunity to be the head coach of the Detroit Lions. And look what he's done. He's built a culture and he's turned it around. NFC Championship game 2 years ago, 15 wins, the number one seed last year. They were just devastated by injuries. Again, they had 18 defensive players on injured reserve at the same time. For perspective, that's all 11 starters and 7 backups. You can't win if you have that many injuries. They bounced back once again incredibly from a loss week 1. They've won 11 straight weeks now, or 11 straight games after a loss, longest streak in the NFL. They absolutely crushed the Bears. I have no idea if Caleb's going to make it in Chicago. I have no idea if Ben Johnson's going to be everything we thought he was. But sometimes we rush coaches as much as we rush quarterbacks. And that combination may be the problem we're seeing in in Chicago right now. And that's straight facts, homie.